Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Oh, yeah, live around the world on the internet at MichaelDukesShow.com and across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite radio station and or FM translator. It is the Michael Dukes Show, where we talk about Alaskan issues all day, every day. It's what we do right here on the big radio show. Today is Tuesday, and you know what that means. Tuesday is our deep dive day. This is where we open up the hood and pull all the wires back and rip them out and say, where do these things go again? I forgot. That's what we do. We dive into the issues and we talk about specific things. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, is coming in to join us today. And we got some big issues to talk about with him today, including what's going on with the Republicans in this election cycle, some issues on the Cook Inlet, and even some things happening up on the North Slope. So we're going to dive into those things here in just a hot second. Then we're going to do some recap. I'll give you some of my in-depth thoughts, deep thoughts from me. And then we'll finally finish up with Chris' story, of course, for our weekly life coaching lesson and so much more. It's Tuesday, man. It's going to be busy. So without further ado, let's get down to it, shall we? And jump into it with Brad Keithley from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, who's joining us from the far-flung world of Nova Scotia. Hello, my friend. How are you doing today?
Michael, I'm doing great today. How about you?
You know, there are no complaints on this end of the world because nobody listens. How are things in Nova Scotia? You getting ready for some musical stuff or what?
I am. This is the time of year for Celtic Colors, and I'm on my way there. I'm in Halifax right now, sort of jerry-rigged to get a video and an audio feed. But I'm doing great.
Isn't technology wonder? If I had told you 10 years ago, Brad, that you'd be broadcasting to me on video from live around the world, would you be like, yeah, right, that's going to happen? I mean, it's kind of cool. Technology has caught up with us.
It is, but the things someday
let's start. Yeah.
But someday I'm going to take a picture.
Oh, sorry.
Of how I
go
set
ahead.
This up.
Yeah, no. I know if you looked at all the stuff that's in front of me and everything else, people don't realize exactly how much stuff is going on in the background. Sometimes it's pretty amazing. All right, Brad. Well, let's dive into it. The weekly top three. We'll start off with number one, your supposition is that the Republicans have backed themselves into a bit of a corner this election cycle, and so give us your thoughts on that. What do you mean by that?
Well, there was an op-ed in the ADN written by former Anchorage School District Superintendent Carol Como that brings this to mind. The title of the op-ed was Featherly. She's talking about Walter Featherly, who's a candidate, independent candidate, Democrat candidate in South Anchorage for the legislature. Featherly is a fighter for kids and schools. Well, as we've talked about on the show a lot, people who propose PFD cuts propose to fund government through PFD cuts, which Featherly is doing, aren't fighting for kids. They're fighting to take dollars out of the hands of kids and shield top 20% non-residents and the oil companies from paying for government costs. They are doing the exact opposite of what they claim they're doing. They're taking money from kids, from middle and lower income Alaska family kids in particular, and spending that on things that they want to do instead of using a broad base and getting contributions towards those goals, towards those spending goals from the top 20% non-resident and the oil companies. But and Republicans should be calling them out. But here's the deal. Here's how Republicans have backed themselves into a corner. Republicans sort of are Democrat light in the sense that they say they want to spend also. Julie Colomb, who Featherly's running against, isn't saying, oh no, I don't want to spend. What she's saying is, I just want to spend differently, or I want to spend a little bit less than the independent does. But because they don't propose alternative revenue measures, what's going on is they can't call the Democrats out for being hypocrites when they say they're doing it for the kids, when in fact they're not doing it for the kids. If the Republicans would talk about alternative revenue measures, more broad-based, like Ben Carpenter, more broad-based revenue measures that drew a little bit from everybody, when they talked about their campaign, when they talked about their opponent, they could call the opponent out and said, look, he's a hypocrite. Walter Featherly is a hypocrite because he says he's doing it for the kids, but he's not. He's doing it to shield. He wants to spend more, but he's doing it in a way that shields the top 20% non-resident in the oil companies. Featherly has in particular said that he supports SB 21 as it is, that he doesn't think we need to raise, that he doesn't think the oil companies need to contribute more. He thinks we ought to take it out of PFD cuts. And in fact, in the Alaska Beacon questions and answers, Featherly said we ought to take it out of the PFD, that he thinks the PFD should be cut to pay for these things. But Colomb can't call him out for that, can't call him out for the hypocrisy of that, just like a bunch of the other Republicans can't call their Democrat opponents out for the hypocrisy of wanting to spend, but spending it on the backs of middle and lower income Alaska families and on the backs of kids, can't call them out because they don't have an alternative revenue measure. Ben, Carpenter, is the only Republican in the state that's able to do that, because he's got a fiscal plan that spreads the base broadly, gets a contribution of a little bit from everybody, and he's got the ability to call out Bjorkman for being the hypocrite he is, for saying that we ought to spend, but we ought to do it on the backs of the very people that Bjorkman claims to be defending.
Right. Well, and
Ben's about the only one able to do that, though.
Well, and in fairness, Ben is not just talking about a single issue either. He's also talking about the other components of the fiscal policy working group, which includes an increase to oil taxes and some cuts and some and a spending cap and and. So he's the only one that seems to have embraced this. I'm surprised at the number of Republicans who pay minor lip service to the fiscal policy working group thing and then go off and do their own thing.
Yeah, and and Michael, the point is here, they put themselves in a corner when they do it. They put themselves in a corner. Colomb isn't saying don't spend. Colomb is right in there saying, yes, we need additional spending for schools, like Republicans generally across the state are saying. They're saying, yes, we need additional spending. But because they're not talking about how they would raise the funds, they're leaving the implication that they're in favor of PFD cuts also, and B, they're putting themselves in a position where they can't call out their opponents as hypocrites. And I think that's a mistake on the Republicans' parts. I mean, the Democrat, Featherly in particular, is just a sitting duck on this issue. You know, you got Carol Como says he's a fighter for kids. Well, he's not. He's a fighter against kids. He's a fighter to take money out of kids' pockets. He's a fighter to take money out of the pockets of middle and lower income Alaska families, which he claims, need the additional spending.
Right.
And Colomb could call him out on that. The Republican Stanley Wright could call out Ted Eichhed, his opponent. Other Republicans could call out their opponents on that issue. They're just sitting ducks on that issue, but they can't because they haven't articulated a funding plan, a funding approach, a fiscal approach like Ben has that gives them the base to be able to do that. And I think it's a mistake on the Republicans' part.
Right. Now, some of this could be attributed to the fact that Featherly and Colomb are in like one of the most opulent districts in the state, one of the most wealthy districts. And so they just don't need the PFD. So he's just talking to his constituency, but she could still stick him on it if she would find a plan that and endorse the plan that the fiscal policy working or some other thing that is equally makes sense. But, they're just talking to their constituency at this point, and those people are like, oh, we don't need no PFD over here,
The unique thing about Ben's plan is, as I've complained in some previous programs, the unique thing about Ben's plan is it's also regressive in the sense that it takes more from middle and lower income Alaska families than it does upper income families. But it's so broad based. I wrote a column on this last week in the Landmine. It's so broad based that even at the tax levels, the minimal tax levels that he's talking about, it takes less from middle and lower income Alaska families than a flat tax would, than a tax based on income would. So it's a great plan in the sense that it expands the base so much that it takes just a little bit from everybody. And Colomb could go in and say, look, yes, we need additional spending. We all need to contribute to it a little bit. Sales tax, Ben Carpenter's sales tax is the right way to do it. Doesn't take much from my constituents. And it treats kids favorably because it reduces the burden, hugely reduces the burden from where we are now with PFD cuts on middle and lower income Alaska families. It keeps money in kids' pockets as opposed to taking money out of their pockets. So Ben's got a plan. The sales tax approach that Ben has, the broad-based sales tax approach that Ben has, really is a plan that Republicans, even in the wealthy districts, could talk about favorably with their constituents, and at the same time point out the hypocrisy of the independents and the Democrats they're talking about when those guys talk about they're doing it for the kids.
Right. Now you're talking about the Featherly Colomb race, but as you pointed out, it's Eichheid versus Wright. There's other Republicans out there who are not endorsing any other kind of ideas, who are again okay with the spending as long as it's spends on their program, and they don't have to say too loudly that it's coming from the PFD. Right. I mean, this is part of the problem with the Republicans that are out there right now. It's not just a Democratic problem. This is a Republican problem as well.
It is. And the Republicans, the Republicans are getting killed on it. They're getting killed on the K through 12 issue. And the reason they're getting killed is they're leaving themselves in a position where they're essentially saying, yeah, I sort of support K through 12, but not as much as my opponent does. And because they're trying to say that they're conservative, they're going to keep part of the PFD. And I don't think it's coming off well. I think if the Republicans would say, "Yep, I support K through 12. I support K through 12 with parameters or with testing or whatever they want to put around it, that I support K through 12." But let me tell you, I support it in a way that my opponent doesn't. I support it in a way that doesn't take money out of the pockets of middle and lower income Alaska families, doesn't take money out of the pockets of kids. I truly support kids, as opposed to my opponent who's wanting to take money away from kids. And I think that would be a good sell on the part of Republicans. Right now, they're playing sort of this wishy-washy defense of yeah, I want to do it, but I don't really want to do it the same way he's doing it. And instead of being able to call out the other guy for saying, and he's trying to take money out of the pockets of kids to do it, I've got a plan that wouldn't do that. And I think that wishy-washiness is working against Republicans in those races.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, the weekly top 3. That finishes up number 1. We're going to move over to number 2 here in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show continues. Up next, we talk about Cook Inlet and more. We'll return. Again, don't forget you can find Brad at ak4sb.com, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. The weekly top 3 continues with more right after this.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes On Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Okay, Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, and the weekly top 3 continues. I'm sorry, I'm just putting something up here for Brad, ak4sb.com. All right, I'm just fixing his little moniker there. Okay, and let's go over to the chat room. Jeannie says, "This is more than a mistake, Brad. It's party suicide." I mean, this has again been part of my consternation with the Republican Party, is that this really has stopped being a Democratic and Republican issue. This is a bigger state government versus smaller, bigger spend versus smaller spend problem, Brad, right? I mean, this is the label. We should throw out the party labels and be looking at who favors just more state spending versus who favors a smaller state spend in the long run.
Yeah, I agree with that, Michael. And it is a mistake. I mean, it is a mistake on the part of Republicans. I mean, they could talk about Ben's proposal. As I look back on it, I think one of the big failures of the legislature last session was when Republicans voted down Ben's proposal in Ways and Means. Voted down Ben's package essentially, but voted down the sales tax in Ways and Means. I'm not sure they fully understood it. Frankly, I'm not sure I fully understood it at the time. I haven't dug into it deeply until recently. But I think that was a big failure because it didn't give the Republicans something positive. It failed to get it prevented Republicans from having something positive to run on. I think Republicans could have said, look, yes, we need a little bit more K through 12. But we need to fund it fairly, and we need to fund it within constraints, and we need to fund it with a spending cap, and we need to fund it with a full fiscal plan. This road that we're going down of using PFD cuts and taking it just out of kids' pockets and taking it out of the pockets of middle and lower income Alaska families isn't working and isn't right. We need a different plan. We need a different fiscal plan. We need a positive fiscal plan. And yes, I support K through 12 funding in the same way that Walter Featherly does, but I've got a plan to pay for it that doesn't take money out of kids' pockets, isn't hypocritical. And I think the failure of the Republicans to pass that, failure of the Republicans on Ways and Means to pass that took away from them a positive message that they could have had coming into this campaign. Yes, I favor these things, but I favor it within constraints. And here's my fiscal plan that creates those constraints, as opposed to taking it out of the pockets of middle and lower income Alaska families. Ben's really the only one who's running on that, but I think successfully so. I think he's able to call out Bjorkman as being hypocritical because of that. I think the rest of the Republicans could have done that as well, and it's a failing on their part, not to have that sort of comprehensive plan that they're able to run on.
Well, and to have all the other discussions surrounding the fiscal policy working group. I mean, even if you don't pass them all, at least to have the discussion. Kyle, who's coming in to stir the pot, says, Brad, do you support any of the other revenue measures outlined in the fiscal policy group, the double, the gas tax, legalize gambling, et cetera? I mean, I personally, I think all of these things should be at least up for discussion. I mean, if we're looking to try and reduce the size and scope of government, we're going to put a spending cap on that. We got to figure out where all the revenues are going to come from, and everybody gets skin in the game. What do you say?
Yeah, exactly right. But all of those things, I mean, that list could go on and on and on and on. And Kyle may listed at some point on and on and on and on. But all of those things don't raise much. I mean, we're talking about $1 billion+ deficit in the state budget, and oil taxes have to play a role in that. But even oil taxes, even reforming oil taxes, don't get all that $1 billion deficit closed. And nobody's talking about taking the deficit down to zero. None of the Republicans are talking about those sorts of spending caps. So yes, we need all the revenue measures, but we need to be realistic about how much they raise, and we need additional revenue measures on top of that raise real money.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. The weekly top 3 continues. We're going to continue here with number 2. That's up next. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio. Like, share, subscribe, ring the bell. Let's do this thing. Here we go.
Brad Keithley joins us every week to discuss oil, gas, and the economic forecast of Alaska. It's the Michael Duke Show.
All right, Brad Keithley is our guest. The weekly top 3 continues. We're jumping into it now on number 2, where we're going to talk about the Cook Inlet gas issue, which it's kind of weird, Brad. I mean, you're hearing all different kinds of things, and is it a crisis? Is it not a crisis? But who's using it as a campaign issue? That's the big question here in number 2, and why?
Well, it's not a crisis. We've talked about that before. There's plenty of gas out there in the world if that's what we need, and we just need to pipe it into the Alaska system if that's what we need. We've got one candidate out there. I'm picking on Featherly today, but he deserves to be picked on. He may be the single worst candidate for the legislature that's running this year. In a column in the ADN, where they interviewed both Colomb and Featherly about various proposals, they interviewed Featherly on energy, and he said he wants to see the state provide royalty and tax relief to current oil and natural gas shareholders in the Cook Inlet. Featherly also proposed that the Alaska Industrial Development and Export Authority should become directly involved in resource development in joint ventures with current shareholders. Right. In other words, we need to give the producers money by giving them royalty and tax relief. Then we need to give them more money by having the state essentially finance some of their operations out in the Cook Inlet. That's going backwards. The problem with the Cook Inlet is that it's not economic. Yes, there may be gas out there, but it's not economic to produce. Economic in the sense that it costs more than alternatives. We saw that last year in the utility study. We've talked about that a lot. No one has come forward with a different study that's shown that Cook Inlet, in fact, would be cheaper than the alternatives if it had to compete on its own. All we've seen are proposals to subsidize Cook Inlet, give money out of the pockets of middle and lower income Alaska families to the producers in the Cook Inlet, subsidize them so they look like they're cheaper than the alternatives, but they wouldn't be, because they're just taking money out of our pockets in order to subsidize the producers, in order to enable them to keep the prices down. You take away those subsidies and they're more expensive than the alternatives. And what Featherly and others who talk about this are really proposing is to drag us backward into a system where all of a sudden the state has to subsidize gas costs into South Central. there are lower priced alternatives, that don't need subsidies, lower priced alternatives than what Cook Inlet would be on an unsubsidized basis. And we need to get down the road of doing that. Roger Marks had an op-ed in the ADN this week. The title of it is "Imported Natural Gas May Be Less Costly Than Many Expect," and it talks about the potential suppliers of natural gas to the Cook Inlet, and it talks about the potential pricing of natural gas to the Cook Inlet. Each Monday, we do a chart. It's called our Monday chart. We do a chart comparing the N-Star gas cost adjustment against current global LNG futures. And when you look at current global LNG futures, the Japan futures, LNG in Japan, LNG to Europe, yes, the current futures prices for LNG in the next couple of years are higher than the N-Star price. But as the N-Star price keeps going up, those LNG prices are coming down. As more and more LNG prices come on the market, those LNG prices are coming down. And by 2027, if you look at our chart, 2027, 2028, those prices, the international prices, the Japanese prices, futures prices, are beginning to trend below the Cook Inlet prices. What we're seeing is the beginning of an LNG industry out there that's growing by leaps and bounds, growing in terms of volumes out there. We see additional projects being announced almost weekly. And there is the growing expectation that we're heading toward a glut of LNG. And so when you talk about pricing, I mean, go back to the utility study of a year ago. They found that even imported LNG, even LNG coming in on barges, was cheaper than the long-term Cook Inlet price because of how costly Cook Inlet was. We're also seeing the beginning of a number of proposals out there to develop renewable options. The increased deliveries from Bradley Lake, from the hydropower down at Bradley Lake. We've seen in this week's ADN, there was an article entitled "Veterans of Alaska's Oil Industry Look to Blaze a Renewable Energy Pathway in the State," talking about a couple of guys who used to work for BP, who've set up a company and who are looking at developing renewable power, wind power to feed into the grid. We have solar power that's being talked about on the Kenai. There are a number of options as the market's realizing the increased price of Cook Inlet production. There's a number of options developing out there that are lower priced, that are more economic for South Central. What Featherly and others who say, "Oh, we're going to defend the Cook Inlet no matter what," what they're suggesting is to plow more state money into these projects, plow more state money into the Cook Inlet through subsidies, tax subsidies, and through direct investment by ADA, that are just going to keep sinking us deeper and deeper and deeper into the muck of an uneconomic gas supply. We ought to be looking forward. Candidates who are looking forward and saying, "Yep, Cook Inlet, if it can compete, that would be great." But all the projections are that it can't compete. We need to be looking at economic alternatives. We need to be looking at what LNG can do. We need to be looking at what renewables can do. We need to be looking at more economic alternatives, as opposed to subsidizing the past, trying to keep the past alive by throwing more state money at it, increasing budget deficits, taking more money out of middle and lower income Alaska families. We ought to be looking forward. And candidates like Featherly, who want to sink us in the past, A, don't understand economics, energy economics, and B, they're candidates who say the state is a solution to everything. We don't need candidates like that. That's how we've gotten into this budget deficit. We need candidates looking forward, who look to the market, who look to market economics, who understand energy economics, and who are looking for economic alternatives to meet Cook Inlet's needs.
You know, what really always strikes me is how people get so emotionally tied to this with Alaskan gas that somehow we're doing ourselves a disservice if we don't use our own resources, even when they're not economically viable. But it's okay to have the state pour all the money into it as long as we're using Alaska gas. No, really, no matter what the long-term costs are. And that's what we seem to be hitting here. And then, of course, we have the same answer that several of the more conservative candidates have even said on the program. Well, if we import gas, we're at their mercy. We're at they can cut us off at any time. The they, the them, the their. And I'm just like, but who's they? I mean, if that's the case, we could run out of toilet paper next week if they decided to cut us off, or food or whatever else we ship up here. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of fear mongering on that, when you have to look at it kind of coldly in an economic light to realize in the long term, the state can't afford to be offsetting a lot of these costs in the long term, because it's a sinkhole. I mean, how much money do you pour into it? And if the oil companies are benefiting in that way, will they just not encourage that kind of spend? Because, hey, we're doing okay, we're making money, and we're doing this, and we can do things that we can't do anywhere else because nobody else will pay us for it. I mean, it just seems like it's a never-ending cycle.
This is this generation's equivalent of Hammond's barley project, right? This is where, for those who don't recall it, Hammond had this great conception that we're going to grow barley out in the bush, or out in interior Alaska, and we're going to become a big barley supplier. And that was, we pumped a bunch of state money into that project. Well, it didn't work out. Economics didn't support it, and we couldn't give it enough money to make it economic, and so it finally died away. And we look back on it and we say, oh boy, that was a boondoggle. Why the heck did we do that? Let's let the market economics rule. It's the same thing going on here. If we pour a bunch of money into this, we're going to look back on it and say, why the heck did we do that? Because even Featherly is only talking about a couple of fields. He's talking about subsidizing John Hendricks's Kitchen Lights field, and he's talking about subsidizing Blue Crest's Cosmopolitan field. And those get us only a little of the way toward what we need. What happens after that? Do we now have to subsidize exploration? Do we now have to go out and spend even more money, turn Ada into an oil and gas company to be, plunging holes around in the Cook Inlet? It's a never ending cycle. Once you get into this sort of state subsidized project, it's going to be a never ending cycle. Well, we decided we didn't want LNG, so we're going to have to keep exploring for Cook Inlet gas. Let's let market economics rule. As Roger Marks pointed out, there may be the LNG, may be what people are saying about LNG, maybe LNG costs may be overblown. Certainly the futures market is saying that what people are projecting for LNG costs are overblown. The utility study last year said LNG, of the alternatives out there right now, LNG is more economic. The last thing we need, and some people are saying this, the last thing we need is this big line down from the North Slope that we'd have to pay off over 40 years. We'd be locked into it. We wouldn't be able to pursue more economic alternatives because we'd be paying that sucker off for 40 years. We don't need to lock into long-term supplies. We need to let the market evolve and develop the alternatives that are less costly to us than what the Cook Inlet would be if we had to subsidize it.
I'm a pretty simple man, and when I look at this, I look at known supplies and unknown supplies is how I look at this. Like, known supplies of imported LNG, we know what it's going to be. We know that it's stable. We know it's going to be there. Would I love to have Alaskan gas? Absolutely. But where is it? How do we find it? Is it really there? And it's all this if come versus the actual, the potential. It might be there, but let the market decide. Don't try and subsidize all these things to the point of, because we know what happens with subsidies. They grow and grow and grow and grow, and then they realize, oh, it was a boondoggle. We forgot to check our math at the end. We already know that it will be cheaper to bring it in. And again, I would not be happy having to import Alaska gas. But if it makes sense economically in the long run, when the extraction technology gets better, or when the discovery technology gets better, the exploration technology gets better, we might find more gas in these areas. And hey, look, we've got a landfill, or we've got a big surprise here. That's great. I find it hard to think that people want to bet on the if come rather than the sure thing at this point.
Well, we got people who are doing that, though. I mean, we got Featherly. And what they're doing, they're just going to stall progress. They're going to stall the development of more economic alternatives. They're going to stall the market, and as part of this nostalgia play of we need Cook Inlet gas. We're always going to need Cook. We just have to have Cook Inlet gas. It's like it's got some magical qualities to it. We have to have Cook Inlet gas, and we need it so much we're just going to pour a bunch of state money in there. We're just going to pour a bunch of middle and lower PFD cuts for middle and lower income Alaska families, because Featherly's already told us he doesn't believe in the PFD. So we're just going to pour more and more and more money from Alaska families into this effort in a nostalgia play to keep looking backwards, to keep looking at, we've always been supplied by the Cook Inlet. We always need to be supplied by the Cook Inlet. Those candidates that are doing that aren't candidates we want to elect. They're going to take the oxygen, they're going to suck the oxygen out of the room when we talk about true alternatives, developing a state economy that's based on true economics as opposed to false economics of state subsidies. They're just they're going to drag us into the past. We need candidates who are forward looking, who rely on the market, who want to find market alternatives, who want to create a level playing field for market alternatives and let Alaska develop economically as opposed to in a state subsidized fashion.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. The weekly top 3 continues. Number 3 is dead ahead. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio.
Listened to by more staffers in Juneau than any other show, because their bosses told them to. And after what they just heard, oh man, they're going to be pissed.
You're a bad, bad man.
The Michael Duke Show.
Brian says it right here. It distorts the market and leads to more malinvestment. That's what happens when you get all that government money in there. It distorts the market because you're not allowing the free market to make the choices, the true economic choices, because you're propping everything up. Frank says in regards to that question about, they may just cut us off. He goes, don't we ship all our other fuel in? Not all of it, but a big chunk of it. We do ship in a big chunk, especially gasoline. The heating oil, a lot of the heating oil is made here, but everything, a lot of everything else is shipped in. So yeah, what's to cut us off from that? What's to cut us off again from toilet paper or food or whatever? We have to ship a lot of that stuff in. Why? Because of the economics. We used to be the Matsu used to be the breadbasket of Alaska until it became economically unfeasible to continue because it was cheaper to ship stuff in. That doesn't necessarily make us stable and secure if something were to ever happen, but at the same time, that's the economics of it. People couldn't afford to live here otherwise. That's kind of the bottom line, Brad.
Yeah, exactly right, Michael. And those people, like Featherly and others who say, "Oh no, we've got to keep this." Who have a nostalgia play? We got to keep the Cook Inlet alive. Those people are raising the costs to live in Alaska. They may say, oh no, if we subsidize it enough, it'll look cheaper, but we've subsidized it. We've taken money out of somebody's pocket. We've taken money out of Alaskans' pocket in order to subsidize it and make it look cheaper. It's more expensive. After you strip the subsidies off, it's more expensive. That's what the utility study from last year told us. That, in fact, is what the futures market, the LNG futures market, is telling us, that it's more expensive to use Cook Inlet gas. And so if we just try to hang on to that in a nostalgia play, we're just making that Alaska more expensive. Alaska already has a higher cost of living than the rest of the lower 48. We're already bleeding people out in substantial part because of our higher cost of living. And the people who are saying want to make the nostalgia play of keeping the Cook Inlet alive by pouring state money into it are just going to make it even more expensive.
Right. Well, and driving the point home, it's not just state money, as Jeannie says. Drive the point home. Say it's the residents' money, not the state's money. It's not just state money; it's money that's coming out of your pocket. Because where's the money coming from? The PFD. All of those, credits and revenues and everything else that will all have to come from somewhere, and they're already spending to the max. Well, then, where's it coming from? The PFD. That's the biggest pot of money until that's gone, and then there will be taxes. That's the thing.
There'll be other taxes. There'll be additional taxes. PFD cuts are already taxes. But that's, I mean, that's exactly right. It's not free. Cook Inlet gas is not a free good. If you start subsidizing it to produce it, it's not a free good. It's not a less expensive good. It's a more expensive good that's just subsidized.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
we could have made barley less expensive. We just would have kept pouring state money in.
Well, and Kyle makes a great point. He says the long, slow, expensive death of the Matanuska-made dairy is exactly what's happening at Cook Inlet Gas. They tried to prop that up and keep that open in the Matsu for years with more and more state money, and eventually they're like, this is not economically viable. We can't do this. And they figured it out. I mean, it's the same kind of thing. And I mean, how long would it take us to figure it out? How long would it take us to figure it out in the Cook Inlet when everybody's dependent on it? Would it be 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, and we realize we poured millions and millions and millions of residents' dollars, citizens' dollars into this to make it quote unquote cheaper? Because you're never seeing the true cost because you're paying for it out of your PFD cuts.
Yeah. It's as I say, we look back on barley and we say, why the hell did we do that? We look back on, Kyle's got a good point. We look back on Matanuska made and we say, why the hell did we ever do that? Why did we pour that money in there? And it's going to be exactly the same with the Cook Inlet, except now we have the opportunity to prevent that going in or prevent it going further. Going in, we have the opportunity to say, look, we're going to let economics rule. If the Cook Inlet can find production that's lower cost, great. Buy all you can. Get it into the system. If they can't do that, then we need to find more economic alternatives. Right. And we're seeing the unleashing of economic alternatives as people talk about various renewable projects.
Sure. Well, I'll go a step further. I'd say I'd even be willing to pay a little more for gas, even if it was slightly more than LNG, because if the long-term benefits are we have it here, then even a slight increase is better. But if it's substantially different, which is what the report is showing, then it doesn't make any sense. Why do we continue in that?
But Michael, why would you even pay a little bit more? I mean, you're subsidizing that. You're increasing the cost of living in Alaska for that benefit. Look, the world runs on trade.
Sure.
As Frank pointed out, we get a bunch of our fuel already from elsewhere in the world. The world runs on trade. Alaska is part of that. Alaska benefits from that. We get cheaper cost goods from outside. We ought not to stop that now.
All right, we're going to jump into it. Here we go. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Like, share, subscribe. Here we do it.
The Michael Duke Show. Seriously humorous with a pinch of intellect. Sorry. That is humorous. Here's Michael Dukes.
Okay, Brad Keithley is our guest. Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We're on to number 3 of the weekly top 3. Some moves up on the North Slope. Brad, what's going on? What's going on up there?
So there have been a couple of headlines about the recent sale by Chevron of its assets on the North Slope, and some concern I've seen and I've heard some people express about, well, we're just having another major leave the state, and that's a problem. It's really not. So let's talk just a second for why Chevron's doing this, and then let's talk about what's coming in its place. Chevron's doing this because Chevron just made a huge major acquisition of Amerada Hess, just approved by the Federal Trade Commission, just approved by the federal government. They're on track to close it if they haven't already closed it. Big deal for Chevron. Significant change to its corporate reserve basis. And Chevron's realized, like all majors do when they do a bit major deal, you can't own everything. So if I'm going to buy this toy, if I'm going to buy Amerada Hess and get the benefits out of the Amerada Hess transaction, and they're substantial. Amerada Hess owns a substantial position off of Guyana, one of the new major oil plays out there. Amerada Hess has a position in the Permian Basin and has a position elsewhere in the world. That's a good match for Chevron's production base. But if you're going to buy this new toy, you have to, you know, sort of like our mothers told us at some point, if you're going to get a new toy, you have to give an old one up, because you can't just hoard toys to the nth degree. So Chevron's repositioning itself by getting rid of some assets that don't fit its base as well anymore. It announced the sale of its Alaska assets yesterday. It announced the sale of its Canadian tar sands, or oil sands. There we go. I'm not supposed to use the word tar. Oil sands assets, and some other Canadian assets. So Chevron's just repositioning its base. That's why Chevron's selling. It's nothing against Alaska. Chevron held a non-operating interest, a very small non-operating interest. Took some of its attention and some of its time to pay attention to it, and so repositioning that, getting some money out of that to help pay for Amerada Hess is a good thing for that. That's why Chevron's doing it. It's not because they suddenly got upset with Alaska. It's
Right.
They're doing it because they're repositioning their base. What's the good news out of that is that there were offers for the Chevron assets from sort of these private investment funds that are cropping up in the oil industry, funded by private money, form an oil company, usually a non-operated oil company, to come in and make investments and sort of ride the wave of revenues from oil in that fashion. It's an oil play by some of these private funds, and there were offers made for the Chevron assets by some of these private companies, and that would have, if Chevron had accepted those, if that would have been where we went, that would have been sent a message that maybe things aren't perfect, that we're now getting sort of some more hill corps, if you will, that are coming in and taking parts of the state's oil base. But that's not what happened. What happened was Conoco, which is a joint interest owner, or a joint owner with Chevron in these various assets, exercised its right of first refusal that you have under the operating agreement, exercised its right of first refusal to buy these assets from Chevron instead. Under operating agreements, the joint owners all have a right of first refusal. If someone wants to sell, they have a right of first refusal to take those assets at whatever the market price is, whatever the going rate is for those assets. And Conoco exercised its right to do that with respect to the production assets. And that's a good sign, actually, because it means Conoco is stepping up and saying, look, we like Alaska. We like the revenue. We like the resource base we've got in Alaska. We like the position we've got in Alaska, and we're willing to pay a little bit more to expand that resource base a little bit more. If they would have said, nah, we don't want those assets, let the private equity people have it, that would have been a sign that maybe Conoco didn't believe as strongly in its Alaska base, sign that maybe there's a little bit of a question mark there. But the fact that Conoco stepping up and exercised its right of first refusal, I think, is a positive sign for Alaska, and a positive sign about their beliefs in our resource base. They did apparently let Chevron sell some of its pipeline interests to these private equity owners, and part of the equity position in the Kaparik line was sold to Doyon as well. But pipelines are a little bit different. Pipelines are just sort of money makers, as long as you got oil behind it. Pipelines are they sort of they charge a tariff, they charge a rent for the use of the system, and you have to invest every once in a while, but you get sort of a steady stream of money out, sort of a utility type return on those assets. And so they did let the private equity owners in on that, but that's not the same thing as letting the private equity owners in on the upstream on the oil and gas assets.
Yeah, so I mean, essentially, that's the easy money is the pipeline. You basically have to spend a little money to maintain, but other than that, you're just got a meter on it. Every gallon that goes by, you're making a little money on every gallon or every barrel that goes by. So it's easy money at that point.
It is, and it's not really. I mean, pipelines are not as sensitive. the reason you want to focus on maintaining your upstream positions, because then you get the information about what the new opportunities are. You make the decision about where you want to develop the new opportunities. You make the decision about the pace you want to develop the new opportunities. You make the decision about where you want to drill new wells. Pipelines really aren't that way. Pipelines, you're not getting a whole lot of information. You're not getting a whole lot of upside opportunity out of pipelines. So it's more of an investment play than it is than the upstream is. And Conoco still has held on to the majority position, even in the Kuparuk pipeline, and has held on to the role of operator, which really makes the decisions about where you go. To the extent there is a decision about where you go and at what pace on a pipeline, it's really the operator and the majority owner that makes that decision. And Conoco's held on to that. So I can understand letting the financial players in on a pipeline, the people who just are looking for returns in on a pipeline. Conoco's really held on to the decision-making process and made the decision to invest more money to keep their position in the upstream. And as I said, I think that's a good thing for Alaska, a good signal for Alaska.
So again, showing Alaska is still a viable player in the oil and gas market. All right, Brad, last 2 minutes, summate everything we've put together here, especially in light of the fact that we're 3.5 weeks away here from the elections, and we look at all this stuff. Give us a summation here on the way out the door.
Well, I think the Republicans have missed an opportunity to go back to the first one and maybe the most important one in light of the election coming up. I think Republicans have really missed an opportunity to call out Democrats and independents for the hypocrisy that they're engaged in, saying they want to spend, but they want to shield the top 20% non-residents and oil companies from paying for that spending. They just want to spend on the backs of middle and lower income Alaska families. I think Republicans have really missed an opportunity. A lot of Republicans just sort of look like Democrat light. Yeah, I want to spend, but I'm not sure how I want to spend. I mean, I'm not sure I've got a plan on how to spend other than just, take less maybe from middle and lower income Alaska families. I think they missed an opportunity to have a big push on a responsible fiscal plan that put Democrats on the defensive. And on the second thing, in terms of the election, the second issue, we need candidates who are forward looking about Cook Inlet and who are looking at letting the market develop the best, most economic response to Cook Inlet, as opposed to looking backward, nostalgic, and trying to keep Cook Inlet gas alive by throwing more and more and more state money at it. We need candidates who have the understanding, the knowledge, and the feel for where the energy industry is going, where the Alaska energy, the electricity and the gas industry are going forward. We need candidates who understand that, as opposed to candidates who are looking backward.
Well, and again, not get stuck in what you're calling the nostalgia loop, which I think is, again, it's another way of saying this emotional tie to it must be Alaska gas no matter what, even if it doesn't make economic sense, which ought to make everybody scratch their head and go, wait a second, this should always make economic sense. Otherwise, again, it'll be another barley project. It'll be another mat-made. It'll be something. Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. You can find him at ak4sb.com or on Twitter or on Facebook. He loves to argue with you out there. Go ahead and make your statements out there. All right, Brad, final thoughts here as we get ready to wrap up. Let me go back to the chat room real quick, see if there's any other good good comments here. I asked Kyle what he thought, what he would, if he doesn't like the fiscal policy working group plan, what was his plan? And he said, I support the statewide flat income tax with zero exemptions. I support closing the S-corp loophole. I support a higher overall oil and gas tax regime. I support ending production credits, not exploration credits. And I support auditing ADIA and AHFC and DOT capital spending audits. Thanks for asking. I think those are all good things. I think each and every one of those is a viable step in the right direction. But again, trying to make it all work, I don't see anybody proposing any of those things in the legislature. We got to work with what we got in front of us, right, Brad?
Well, yeah, but I think Kyle, actually, I think that's a good platform with one exception, and I'm sort of moving away from where I've been on the flat tax. But the exception is Ben's sales tax, and the difference is Ben's broad base. I mean, the sales taxes we've had people talk about in the past, the sales tax that was proposed during the Walker administration, the sales tax that the Dunleavy administration, in fact, talked about in 2020 and 2021, or was it 2020 and 2021? The sales taxes they talked about were narrow-based sales taxes. And with a narrow base, what you're doing is you're pushing the burden on middle and lower income Alaska families above a flat tax. And so a flat tax seemed more appropriate, more fair, more equitable than a sales tax when you're talking about a narrow-based sales tax. What Ben's proposal is, and again, go read my column from last Friday's landmine, because that really, I try to lay it out. What Ben's proposal is a very, 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 very broad-based sales tax, almost to the ends of GDP. All of the revenue, all of the businesses, producing businesses in the state, and at that broad scale, you're pushing a lot of the burden that otherwise is falling on middle and lower income Alaska families, certainly falling on them from PFD cuts, but to a degree would also fall on them from a flat tax. You're pushing that burden you're pushing that burden broadly instead on tourists, non-residents, products that are being sold into the lower 48, products that are being sold internationally. You're pushing a lot of burden away from Alaska families onto other things. And that burden on those other things is not very big because you're spreading it so broad. The divisor is so big, the divisor into the revenue you're trying to raise is so big that the burden is a very thin stretch on everybody. So Kyle, back to your thing. I think that's a good outline, but I would urge you and others to consider Ben's sales tax as an alternative to the flat tax. Yes, it's still regressive, but it takes less from middle and lower income Alaska families than even a flat tax would. Not only less than the PFD cut does, but less than a flat tax would. And I think that's a positive development. So that's the one amendment I would make to my past positions, and it's an amendment I would make to Kyle's proposal.
Several people, including Franks and Greg, have pointed out the problem with the sales tax is that we, the business owners, become the collectors. And Frank says, who has to collect the tax, keep track of it, return it to the state, maintain the records for X number of years. There is a cost to businesses to try and collect this, which has not, really been discussed in any of this. And I know that is one of the downsides to a sales tax, is that you're essentially making every business owner a tax collector under penalty of law. If they do something wrong or they mess up or anything else, it can be a problem in that regard.
Yep, it is. But we've got, come on, guys, we got to raise revenue somehow, right? And the question really needs to be, what's the best for the overall Alaska economy? And what's best for the overall Alaska economy is to make it as broad as possible and as thin as possible for all of the various pieces of the Alaska economy. It would be great if we didn't need to raise additional revenue, but that's not the world we live in. And so the analysis needs to be what's best for the overall Alaska economy. What hits the overall economy the least hard? And a broad-based sales tax, particularly the ultra-broad tax that Ben's talking about, has the advantage of doing that, taking the least from everybody as opposed to piling it on somebody.
Right. Well, and again, Jeannie says broad-based taxes are still coming out of we the people's pockets, but I think your point is this is the least impactful, or the least that, it leaves us with the most money in our pocket in the long run. Is that right?
Yep. So Ben's proposal is about 60% comes out of the pockets of Alaska families, making maybe a little bit less. Even the top 20% pay some, but a little bit less. The rest of it's coming from tourists, non-residents, businesses doing international and exporting to lower 48 and other business transactions. And so, yes, it's coming out of the people's pockets to a point, but it's not coming out nearly as much as coming out of people's pockets as with PFD, which is entirely focused on Alaska families. has no broad base at all,
Right.
and less even than a flat tax.
Final thoughts, Brad. 60 seconds here.
Well, we've got a short time to go in the election, and I think what in the campaigns, what we ought to be doing is looking for people who we don't want. Walter Featherly leads the charge on that, because not only is he trying to tax middle or family tax kids, but he's also looking backwards on energy policy. We need to look people who are looking forward and who are least open to the idea of finding revenue options that do not burden any one segment of the Alaska economy, but spread it across the broadest possible base.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Thank you, my friends. I appreciate you coming on board. We'll talk to you next week. Okay.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me.
Enjoy the music. All right, folks, we're out of time. We got to go. The Michael Dukes Show, Common Sense Radio.
Whoa, buddy. Put that thing back in its holster. We haven't gone anywhere.
I don't understand.
Check out the MichaelDukesShow.com for information on how to get access to the podcast.
Welcome to the party, pal.
The Michael Dukes Show.
The greed and the entitlement is astounding to me.
What more could you want from a low-budget radio program?
This is a dumpster fire.
That was just BS.
It is time to get a new perspective.
We know just what you need, and we've got just the cure. Open wide and prepare for a steaming hot cup of freedom.
I just don't fathom it.
The Michael Dukes Show, streaming live across the world.
Live around the world on the internet at michaeldukeshow.com and across the state of Alaska on this, your favorite yada, yada, yada radio station. That's what it is, your favorite radio station. Good morning, my friends. Thanks for coming in and joining us. Hour 2 of the big radio broadcast for today, the Tuesday edition of the show. We just finished up with Brad Keithley for Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets and the weekly top 3. If you missed that, I think you can go back and you can listen to it on the podcast, which is available, well, wherever you find podcasts, CastBox, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Google Play, iTunes, wherever you find podcasts, just search up The Michael Dukes Show and you'll find it. And if you subscribe, it'll automatically download it to your mobile device and you'll be ready to go every morning right after the show, because that's when I upload the podcast, just right after the show. And so every day you can listen, even if you don't get up and be a member of the 6 o'clock club, which is, you know, all the folks who are here at 6 a.m. So you could, it's it's the cool kids club. You can be here. You just have to get up before 7 a.m. and join us on the show. That's it's the official club of the Michael Dukes Show. Coming up in this hour, we're going to finish up the hour with Chris Story, the man from Homer, who's going to come in with our weekly uplift and review. We might do, let me ask him if he wants to do a recap of the election, because that was a question that I should have asked him earlier. And see if he wants to talk about it, because the election down in Homer in an early segment. The election down in Homer actually went down. It was very interesting because I fully expected the hospital bond to pass, because there was $100,000 being pumped into the community in mailers and commercials and everything else. And it was pretty astounding. I thought for sure that this was probably going to pass, and we were kind of spitting into the wind, so to speak, when we were talking about the reasons why it probably shouldn't pass. And I think it was in large part due to the work of Chris Story that we were able to go over that and talk about it. So Chris says he's good to join us. So Chris will join us a segment early to talk about that before we jump into our weekly life coaching lessons. So we'll be talking with Chris here in about 10, 15 minutes about that. Brad was bringing up some interesting stuff here at the end of the show. And then during the commercial break, we finished up with him here in the chat room. And it's always interesting to take a look at this. Brad has actually moved off of his position, he said, and he's moved off of his position that the flat tax is probably the best way to fund government. He's looking more and more at this new sales tax, and saying that it hits fewer. I mean, it's a broader base because it's only funded about 60% by Alaskans and 40% by tourists and international business and everything else. And so essentially he's kind of more hip to that because it leaves more dollars in the pockets of Alaskans. So that's an interesting take, and we probably should get him to break that down for us. Maybe next week we'll ask him to break that down for us and go over the reasons why, because he's been talking about a flat tax for almost 10 years now, and it's an interesting comparative when you look at something that he's been so passionate about for so long, and to see that this might be the better answer. This 2% tax that Ben is talking about might be an easy thing, but it is not without costs. Okay, we know that. Several people in the chat room brought up the fact that business owners have to shoulder the burden of collecting that tax. And it is true. They do have to collect that burden. There's a whole lot of stuff that we have to shoulder the burden of many things. This might be one of them. Would it be one that I would be happy to shoulder as a business owner? Not necessarily, but I guess, would I rather have my full PFD? Yes. Could we do that? Possibly. That's the question there. The other thing that we talked about was using the comparatives of some of the other boondoggles that we've seen in the state and comparing it to the Cook Inlet gas fields. We talked a lot about the Delta Barley Project. We talked about the Matt May Dairy down in the Mat-Su, and how this idea that somehow government can come in and save us from the economics of the free market is part of to me, this is part of the problem that we've had with governments in this country. Well, all governments, but governments in this country, especially for the last 120 years. I think it was John J. Hill that was the first entrepreneur who got subsidies for his railroads. Now, people would argue, well, railroads are great. They caused the westward expansion and everything else. Well, yes, but at the same time, there was a lot of private investment that was going into there, and the government, I think, just wanted to get involved at some point. And I question whether or not it was actually necessary in the long run. The only problem is that every time the government gets involved in something like this, and the government decides that they need to put money into something, whether it's a Delta Barley Project or a Matt May Dairy or something like that, that they can somehow make it more even and equitable and cheaper for the citizens, a couple different things happens. First of all, as Brian points out in the chat room, that kind of action distorts the market and leads to more malinvestment, because you're getting mixed signals from the free market, because the free market is not really ruling anymore. Instead, it's the government money is distorting the market. Second of all, nobody is ever asking the question, well, where does that money come from? Right? Oh, okay, so the state's going to pay a bunch of money into this, whatever project it is, barley, gas, milk, whatever it is, they're going to pay money into that to make it more equitable and affordable for the citizens. Well, but the question is it really more affordable, or is the cost just hidden? Is the cost just hidden? I mean, if hypothetically, if the Mat Made had survived or the Delta Barley Project had survived, and we were buying barley and milk from this state-run entities, would it really be cheaper? Or is the money that is going to offset that to make it cheaper coming from somewhere else that we're not? I mean, it is. It's essentially coming from your PFD. And this is the same argument that they're making right now in the Cook Inlet. Oh, well, we want to give them, royalty credits. And they'll say, they will say, well, they will essentially say to themselves and to others, well, we need that Alaska gas and it's cheaper, and that's why we need to, that's why, and it's only royalty credits. We're not really spending any money. We're just not forcing them to pay their royalties. Well, the thing is that all those royalties and are baked into projections, right? I mean, the governor has a 10-year forecast. And that 10-year forecast includes revenue, projected revenue from oil or gas royalties, in this case, gas royalties, coming out of the Cook Inlet. So when they say, well, we're really not going to spend any money, we're just going to not force them to pay the royalty. The problem is that they built these budgets, these 10-year forecasts, and, as far as available revenue based on those things. And so all of a sudden there's a hole in the revenue. So where does that hole get filled up with? Well, we know. The answer right now is that the hole gets filled up with a PFD taking. With the taxing of your PFD. I know, Randy, it's not a tax. The tax effect of taking your PFD. And so is it really cheaper? If they're taking $2,000 out of your PFD, and let's just hypothetically say that $1,000 of that gets sucked up by the gas royalty thing, and I don't know what the numbers are. I'm just picking a number out of the air. But even if it's $1,000 of that $2,500 that they've taken from your PFD, I mean, are you willing to pay an extra $100 a month to heat your home or to get your lights? Is it really cheaper if you're losing that money on the one side, but your bill remains relatively the same? I mean, that's the thing. We're not seeing it. It's hidden, right? It distorts the market. And that's part of the whole problem here, is that we're just not seeing any of this. It's all hidden. And the idea that somehow we can make Alaska gas more affordable, or Alaska barley, or Alaska milk, or whatever it is, we can make it more affordable by spending government funds to make it more affordable. The question that nobody ever asks is, wait a second, who pays? Where is that money coming from? That's it right there. So this idea that somehow we have got to be dependent only on Alaska gas. Now, again, in a perfect world, I would take Alaska gas 100 times out of 100 if it was economically viable to drill it out of the... I would take Alaska gas. There's 17 trillion cubic feet of gas on the North Slope. I would take gas off the North Slope if we could find an economically viable way to get it here. I mean, if we could tank it, if there was a U.S. flagged, thank you, Jones Act, if there was a U.S. flagged tanker where they could fill the tanker on the North Slope, run it around the coast past Nome and the Bering Sea and down into the Kenai, and we could have Alaska gas imported there, oh man, okay, I'm all about that. If we could have gas in the Cook Inlet and do it economically and viable, I am all about that. The problem is that we can't for the same money. And that's part of the problem, is this whole thing becomes a shell game of, well, it looks to you like it costs the same, but you don't see all the hidden stuff behind the scenes. You don't see the fact that they're taking your PFD to pay for that. Again, this is the problem when you get government involved in the free markets trying to make things fair and equitable for everyone. That is the huge problem there. It's the whole thing is ultimately frustrating to watch, especially from people who I respect and believe in, and then they still come to me with like, well, they could cut off our gas. Who is they? And if they can cut off their gas, they can cut off their, we can cut off their food, they can cut off our toilet paper, they can cut off our gasoline, they can cut off whatever they want. I mean, you keep saying they. Who is the they that's going to cut off our gas? Russia? We wouldn't be getting it from Russia. I mean, I know they cut the people off in Europe, but I mean, that's a whole different deal. I would suggest we don't sign a contract with Russia to get gas. I suggest we work with somebody. Who else is not going to take the money that we're offering them for gas? And again, if we've reached some kind of global issue where that is the problem, gas may be the least of our worries. It might be food and toilet paper that are more problematic at that point. All right. We're up against the break. We're going to go. We got more. Chris Story is coming up. We're going to do a recap of the elections and his thoughts on everything that's going on there. I will say that he played a monumental role. He was probably the cornerstone of the resistance against that hospital bond. And we'll talk with him about that here in just a moment. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio.
What is that?
Common sense. Regularly heard on American radio. Michael Duke Show. Radio.
Okay. Amy just said China could shut it off. How, Amy? If we're buying it from Indonesia, or we're buying it from Japan, or if we're buying it from some other place, or if it's coming, how could China? We're not buying it from China. I mean, again, don't get caught in the fear mongering of, oh, it's just Fat Ray says, what if instead of they can cut off our gas, the politician said the suppliers can cut off our gas, or the supply chain suffers catastrophic failure? I would be more worried about the second than the first. The catastrophic failure thing, yes, that is a real problem. Absolutely. The suppliers can cut off our gas. Why would they? Because they're a business and they've got a contract and they want to make money. Why would they? Anyway, it's the whole thing is so wild. This idea that somehow we can buy our way, into this is just makes no economic sense, I guess is what I'm saying. All right, let me get Christopher here on the line here. Let's see if we can get this squared away. Make it all work. Hey, look at that. It actually worked. Okay. Well.
Good morning, Michael.
Good morning, my friend. How are you doing this morning?
We have a connection. We've got a connection. Doing good.
We've got a love connection.
Hey.
All right. What is your thoughts on this? Since we're talking politics in the beginning segment here, which we normally don't do on the air, but as we got almost 3 minutes here, what is your thoughts on this Cook Inlet oil and gas thing? I mean, should the state be subsidizing all that stuff, or should we be talking about importing, or should we? I mean, what's Chris Story's position on this?
I wish I had just heard what you and Brad just beating this around.
We were beating it around a little bit, and then I kind of expanded on it here on the thing. I mean, my problem is that it seems to be like an emotional tie. People are like, oh, we've got to have Alaskan gas. When I look at what is the most economical thing, if it's most economical to import it, then that's what we should be doing, because that has the lowest impact on the overall economy, and we should be doing. We shouldn't be pouring government money into subsidizing Cook Inlet gas, because even at the end of the day, your bill may be close to the same, but you're not seeing the hidden costs of all these dollars that the government's pouring into it in the backside, basically, distorting the free market. Instead,
we were talking about this with Brad years ago. I mean, probably talking 7 or 8 years ago or 6 years ago. And he said that this is the one commonality that he and Paul Seaton had in common, is that to end the Cook Inlet tax credits, because they're actual credits, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, actually money's paid to the companies versus just a tax credit. Am I following that correctly?
Right.
In other words, they're getting money for exploration.
Well, they were getting money for exploration. What they're talking about now is a royalty relief, which means that they just wouldn't pay the royalty. But there's even a problem with that, Chris, because again, the governor's office has 10-year forecasts, right? 10-year revenue forecasts. And inside those 10-year revenue forecast is baked in currently what's being extracted from the Cook Inlet and the royalties that are being paid there. So if you start giving royalty relief and saying, oh, just take that money and use it for more exploration, well, then there's a hole in your revenues moving forward, and that hole's got to be filled somehow. And so where does the money come from, right? I mean, that's part of the problem.
Have you plugged in the jobs created and then the income that recycles through the communities into your matrix of import versus exploration? I mean, have you considered jobs and all of that?
I have not. I have considered jobs to a point, but not in the math of it. But I mean, again, the market, the market knows what the market knows, right? I mean, overall, what does it require if we keep those jobs open? It requires ever expanding pool of money to continue to fund it, to keep going, right? I mean, the market should be able to run those things. That's my point on it. But all right, anyway, we'll visit.
You're a free market madman.
We'll visit this another day. I am a free market madman. Free markets are the way to go. The problem with the government is that it goes in there and it distorts it and it screws it up. All right, here we go. Chris Story, the man from Homer.
The Michael Duke Show. Not your daddy. Wait, sorry. Not your daddy? Ooh, not your daddy's talk radio. Whew. I was scared for a second. Thought we were going down. Here's Michael Dukes and the show.
That's right, not your daddy. Nor do I play him on TV. All right, Chris Story, the man from Homer, who comes on every week to give us our positivity segment. Got him on for an early segment this week because I wanted to do a recap of the elections, the municipal elections around the state. And I'll be honest, Chris, I truly thought that down on the Southern Peninsula there, that we were going to be kind of sad, because I thought that the hospital bond issue was probably kind of a done deal. And because they poured $100,000 into it, I guess, to advertise it. There were flyers. I heard radio ads. I saw stuff posted all over the internet, digital ads. I saw it everywhere when I was down there. It was like, wow, they are blanketing this community. That's going to be it's going to be a yes. But it turned out that it was not just a no, it was a hell no. It was a 60-something% plus no vote on this. And everywhere I turned when talking to people about this, they were referencing a humble little radio show held by a man named Chris Story, who had an interview between the pro and the con side. And that changed a lot of people's minds, Chris. Talk to me about this and the reaction that you're seeing down there.
A friend of mine coined a phrase, and just there wasn't time to create the T-shirt, but it was no on yes.
Right.
The campaign was
right.
Yes on one, and he said no on yes. I thought that was clever. And I think what I think we've learned, and I think the takeaway, and I hope there's a couple of takeaways, truthfully. One is that we being the Southern Kenai Peninsula, and I think probably any entity, any group that has a county hospital or a borough-owned hospital, and like in our case, it's there for the people's health. We love and appreciate the hospital. For example, I was born in South Peninsula Hospital. I'd like to say I was born in a womb with a view, not far from here. And so I have an affinity for the hospital. I know a lot of people. I never met a single person in this conversation or during the debate that would say something to the effect of, that's a terrible place. Nope, not at all. It's a wonderful place. We've expanded the services over the last 52 or some odd years. greatly. Like the place I was born would effectively look today like a terrible tenement in some awful inner city. Like it is really come a long ways, and on the back of the people on many bonds that have passed before. We passed a $14 million bond. All these different bonds we've passed in the past. But no, that's a bad iteration. But you get the point. We've supported this hospital greatly. We continue to support the hospital. We continue to support the doctors, and grateful for the doctors and the technology we've got here. And we were somewhat pitted against each other in this debate with the marketing. It's like either you're for it or you're against it. And so no, we're not against the hospital. Are we for, though, a $52 million effective dollars bond? Are we for that, or are we saying, hold your horses? You've got some flaws here. There's a fly in my soup, and I'd like to return it. The fly was no contract with the property owner, no written letter of intent, no assurances at all that the property could be purchased at the price that we were being told. Number one. Number two, there was other things baked into it that just didn't make a lot of sense. Like, wait a minute, you're going to buy one of these buildings for well over market value and then tear it down for parking when there's other land available? I mean, nothing made sense about that. When it comes to the profitability of the hospital, I think a lot of people were exposed to, wait a minute, the CEO, great guy, is making 27% of the net. So what's the incentive to have more at the bottom line? Well, it just goes to the borough. We've entered into the daycare business, and they say, no, we haven't. Yes, we have. All those kinds of questions come up, and that was all on the mind of the average voter, and it all sort of became very obvious towards the end. We are yes for healthcare, yes for local healthcare. We are supportive of the good people that save lives every single day up there.
Right.
The question is, do we want an ever-growing, monolith of an institution? And to Dr. Raymond's point, nobody's ever been able to answer, what is the end goal? If we're doing $300 million in services today, collecting $150 million, that's a huge financial juggernaut. What's the goal? 200, 300, 800 million,
Right.
900.
Right.
Is it every single service under the sun available here? What is the ultimate goal? And so I think that we rejected it resoundingly in the service area simply for the fact that this is the wrong bond at the wrong time. What's the mission? And is it time to take a closer look at the entire operation? And that brings me to my second point. And I don't know that I'm correct on that. I don't know, but I want to have the conversation. Is it time for this governing body to become an elected body? So currently it's a self-appointed operating board
Right.
that runs this non-for-profit for the borough. Is it time to create an election system whereby we vote on if we're going to be asked to vote on a $52 million bond, ought not we have an opportunity to vote on who is running the organization? I admit to you, there might be some unintended negative consequences. You get, sometimes, Michael, you may not be aware of this, sometimes nutcakes run for office.
What?
Sometimes,
What?
Sometimes nutcakes run for office. And are we inviting some unintended consequences? Don't know, but I want to have the conversation. And then the other point that I hope this takes away, that the people we take away from this, is that the borough allowed monies from the hospital, which is our money, to be used to market towards us. And in the resolution that they approved, the ordinance that they approved, the expenditure of this money, said, and I quote, to influence the outcome of the election. And I think we need to change that.
Well,
we need to change that never again.
Yeah, there should never be government money used to influence the outcome of an election. In fact, I think that there's actually statutes that prohibit that, and it should have been.
It's right there in the ordinance.
Well, because in Fairbanks they used to have that for school bonds, right? And the school board couldn't appropriate monies to influence the outcome of elections, but they could put educational messages out to inform people what the bond covered. Of course, we all know that then they would skirt around that and then endorse the bond in the advertising anyway. But at least they weren't blatantly saying it was to influence the outcome of an election. And I think you're right, Chris. This is part of the problem. Part of the problem is, as you said earlier, this became a zero-sum game. You're either for it or you're against it. If you're for it, you love people and puppy dogs and butterflies. And if you're against it, you hate good healthcare. You hate people. You hate children. That's the dichotomy they set us up for. When I think you're right, it's more nuanced. It's no, I want good health care. I appreciate the hospital, but at the same time, we've got some questions here. And I think that they're viable, valid questions. And I think you did a yeoman's job of asking those questions when you had Ryan Smith on and you had Dr. Raymond on. You had those guys on there, the back and forth, the give and take. And I'll be honest, people, there was a lot of comments that I saw on social media and Facebook and other places where people were saying, I didn't know that. And I didn't know this. And it was eye-opening. And I got to be honest, that's the power of local radio. Especially, and it's the power of, I guess I would say, non-corporate local radio, where you can basically choose your subjects and go after it. And you did all the legwork yourself. You got it all lined up. This was an important piece, and I think it went a long way. I'll be honest with you. I'll just say it flat out. I think you are the reason why this bond did not pass. Now, that may set you up as a target for some people, but I do not.
Thanks a lot.
I don't think you're the king of irrelevance, as the borough mayor said you were. I think that was him deflecting and projecting his feelings because he wishes you were the king of irrelevance, because you brought a lot of this stuff to light. And I think when an electorate is properly informed, as you did here, I mean, that was a public service to inform people and give them both sides of the issues, because all they were seeing was the slap and glitter and polish of all these pieces that the hospital was putting out. I could not find. I was trying to search online for the pros and cons, the ups and downs. What did it really entail? What were the details? There was very little online. The hospital had their own site where they kind of laid it out in their terms, but nobody was questioning it. There was no articles digging into it and saying, well, what does the other side say? There was just nothing there. Your piece was the only piece out there that addressed it from all angles. And I think you should be commended for that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. But the truth of it is that it's well beyond me. Absolutely. And I'm not just saying that for, the lack of a target on my back. I get it completely. I've been in this space a little less than you, but enough to know that when you stand up and have an opinion and state your position, you're going to face potential backlash. I get that completely. I signed up for that. You signed up for that. The people that didn't are the ones that impress me. And that would be, say, for example, Dr. Raymond, another guy that you may or may not have heard of called Guy Rosie, another person behind the scenes named Mike Fell. People like this that stood up and had nothing to gain from speaking their mind and stating their position and opinion on the topic, and did so and followed up with their money and put counterpoint flyers into the mail, put counterpoint ads onto the radio programs of the peninsula, the Southern Peninsula. It really helped educate people. So it was massive, and there's other people involved for sure. And I think the thing that really stands out of my mind is truth in advertising. You and I are held to a standard in our profession. You're held to a standard by the FCC. There's things that you can and cannot say. You must have truth in your advertising. I know this in real estate. They give us a little latitude for what they call puffery. You can puff just a little bit, but you could say emerging view versus you can see a 1/4-inch sliver of water. You know what I mean? So it's like, but you can't say there's a view if there ain't no view. And here's the thing that I just loathed about the marketing campaign that was used against the people with the people's dollars. And that was, not once did they mention the amount of the bond. So the proponents of it pushing it, and the marketing team pushed this into every single mailbox in the whole service area. Not once on that did it say the amount of the bond. Not just, forget the interest, okay? Because people are saying that's hyperbolic. It's called 52 million. Fine, 38.5 million absent the interest. Why wasn't that on the flyer? If you really want to promote this and you really want a fair shake and you're going to use the people's money, it better be into the future informative. That's it. We cannot have a marketing campaign that's done by Madison Avenue. And that's really what is affected on the people. And there was a change in the letter that went out to the people that wasn't approved. And so somebody along the way in the marketing campaign removed a word that would have added some clarity, or at least in my opinion, been a little bit more honest. And that word was removed. And I'd like to know by whom, who approved it. I'd like to know who approved the ads. I'd like to know who in the borough assembly. And I need to find the minutes as to who actually voted for the $100,000 of the hospital's, quote unquote, hospital's money to be used to advertise back to the people, and literally were okay voting for to influence the outcome of the election. It's in the ordinance. I had to read it 3 times. Go, no, my eyes are deceiving me. Surely they didn't say in public in this ordinance that this money was designed to influence the outcome of it. Oh, it's right there in black and white. So those are the things, are the takeaways, in my opinion. We have to say no more big bonds like this without a lot more education before we start spending money.
Well, and especially, again, some of the information that was out there. I mean, the borough mayor was quoted both, I guess, from the dais and in the paper as saying this would reduce the cost of your health care. And of course, we now know that that was not the case. And again, we see the disparity in cost between what happens in Homer and what happens just 70 miles away in Kenai, Soldotna. And we're asking questions. I mean, those should be the questions that are being asked. Right? If it's the same organization, it's 2 different wings or 2 different divisions of the same organization, why does it cost 30% more, 50% more, 60% more to have a procedure done 60 miles away, 70 miles away? I mean, those are the kind of questions that I think people need to be asking, because yes, we all need healthcare. We all want good healthcare, but we also want affordable healthcare. And if this is part of the problem, why would you ever go? The only reason you'd go to a local hospital is because it's an absolute emergency and you couldn't drive 60 miles away. Or in some cases, for some procedures, 200 miles away to Anchorage. Because if it's 10 or 15 or 20% of what it would cost you at home to do it, with a 3-hour drive, why wouldn't you take the 3-hour drive? I mean, that's, those are the questions that should be asked at this point. Final thoughts.
Just that truthfully, and I mean this with all sincerity, I didn't meet a single person in this whole journey that was against the hospital and or the doctors, nurses, and the staff. Not one. It was against the idea behind the bond, not even the idea behind the bond, but the way it was being portrayed and the way it was being marketed, and too much. It was too big a bite, and they came after too much. And I think the people are awake, and I think there's going to be a lot more people looking under the hood and finding out what is going on and how can I help. And that's what I encourage us all to do: is how can I help? What can we do from here? Okay,
Chris is going to give us some positivity up next. Chris, what's your thing for today? What are we talking about?
Build a brand, not a bear. Build a brand.
Build a brand. Build a brand. It's a new franchise. Build a bear. Build a brand. Build a band. Do them all. All right, Chris Story's our guest. We continue in just a second. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio.
Running on 100% pure beard power. Oh, also some coffee. We dip our beard in coffee.
Nice beard.
The Michael Duke Show.
Okay, Chris Story is our guest. Going into the last segment of the show here, we're going to do the positivity thing, but I just want to go back to this real quick, Chris, because who has my real respect in these kind of things? I mean, obviously you, because you put this out there, and I can't tell you how many times I saw links to this podcast that you did. People were just sharing it left and right. They were like, "This is, did you hear this? Did you see? Did you know this? Did you know that?" And you're right. There's a lot of unsung heroes that have gone out there and put their own money where their mouth was and did all those things. But I will say that Dr. Raymond, I admire people like Dr. Raymond. It's like Dr. Wade in Fairbanks, who fought against the hospital to create his own surgery center to fight the certificate of need up there, and fought a vicious battle. And those guys, I mean, you're talking about people whose livelihood is at stake when they fight the system as a doctor. And they're fighting against the local hospital system. I mean, they're creating some real problems for themselves, and yet still being willing to do it and move forward is amazing. And I really appreciated them taking that risk, because it is a risk when you're fighting it. You're a doctor or a clinician, or you work in the medical field in some way, and you're fighting against a hospital, which seems to be happening more and more across the country as these hospitals conglomerate and consolidate together and gather more and more power into themselves. It really, it puts everything at risk. So I'm very, very grateful for their efforts in that regard.
I'm also intrigued that I couldn't find or detect any political ideology separating this issue. It seemed to be very much a citizen-led coalition of disparate-minded people on many, many other topics. And I just found it to be quite a relief, actually, to see Alaskans and Alaskan Americans, if you will, coming together and saying, hold on, something's not right here. The buck's got to stop right here for just a minute, and let's regroup, and we'll think about this later. And it really, again, was not drawn on ideological lines. So that was actually a refreshing piece of it. But truthfully, how on earth can anybody have voted for an ordinance that would allow public dollars to be used to influence the outcome of an election? I mean, we all know that's what's happening, but to be so blatant and then to misuse those dollars and put disingenuous marketing out there. And again, no disrespect to our neighbors who were for this and part of the Yes on 2, the Yes on 1 for healthcare campaign. It's not about them personally. It's about the methodology with which we do this going forward, that I really think we need to have a real pause before there's another bond or there's another type of thing that goes out to the people. There
was a lot of red flags in this, a lot of red flags. I mean, the hospital's now gotten into daycare. Why would you? I mean, what
Well, here's the reason why. This is what they're telling you, is that we were taking up too many spaces in the community. We need to relieve the community's overburdened daycare facilities from our employees' children, so we'll create our own. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's not any different than when I'm waiting in line behind, say, a doctor or a nurse or part of the custodial staff or the administration in line at the car wash. Well, if I have to wait behind them in line at the car, they're taking us. Are we going to have South Peninsula Hospital car wash? Or what about the steakhouse? That's one of my favorites. I'm going to get that T-shirt. What's the beef? South Peninsula Hospital Steakhouse is opening next week, and what we really need. In other words, Michael, what I think happens is there's a siloing effect, or maybe even a bit of a tribalism that's like us and othering. Like, hey, we up here are taking up too much space, so let's go create this thing for ourselves. And it's like, hold on, you're just another employer of neighbors and community members. It's not some other thing where you have to have your own,
if they're
unitards and spacesuits.
If their daycare was only taking care of their personnel and their employees, that'd be one thing. But my understanding was they were going to open it up to the public, and then
that's not necessarily. It's open to the public potentially down the road. We don't know.
Okay,
it could be, but it's a $3 million venture into even just daycare for their employees.
Well, they just wanted to take advantage of Julie Colombe's new daycare assistance thing, where they could write off any taxes that they had for, all that daycare for their own employees, I guess. Anyway, I mean, the whole point to me is, look, there were so many questions, whether it was the valuation of real estate, buying buildings to tear them down, doing all this other stuff, the disingenuousness in the advertising, the fact that they're spending borough dollars, public monies to influence the election. I mean, there's so many questions. It was if I had been down there, it would have been an automatic no. But I think the deeper question now becomes, okay, how do we make this healthcare as good as it is and make it more affordable? That's my next question, because
well, you're being asked to vote on a $52 million bond, but nobody asked you to vote on the lease, which led to the valuation of the purchases of the property. Nobody asked you to vote on should we or should we not open a $3 million daycare. Nobody asked you to vote on the new physical therapy services for $500,000 plus another $400,000 in leasing and blah, blah, blah. It just goes on and on, which is why maybe we need to start having an elected board. That's what I'm wondering.
No, I think that has to be some accountability in there somewhere for it. You can't have a service cost twice as much 60 miles away and not have people asking questions. That's the big thing. All right, building a brand. Chris Story, the man from Homer. Let's get to it. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Let's do this thing. Okay, we're continuing now. Chris Story is our guest, the man from Homer, our guru of positivity. We call him the Tony Robbins of Alaska. Is that an insult these days? I don't know. I'm not keeping up with the kids. Is Tony still in vogue? I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Bigger than ever.
Bigger than ever. All right. Chris Story comes in every week to give us a little bit of life coaching, a dose of positivity, positive mental attitude, and more. Today, his topic is building a brand. A personal brand, a business brand? What are we talking about here, Chris? Building a brand. I want to know all about this.
Your personal brand. And so you have to think about, well, what is a brand? It's a promise, not much else. I mean, there's a promise made when you see, and a brand is not a logo, but when you see a logo, it's indicative of a brand promise, or it should at least point you in the direction of a promise. And I'll never forget, Michael, one time when I was probably in the 7th grade, my mom bought me, or allowed me to purchase, a Ralph Lauren button down. It was an Oxford style button down. I loved the shirt. It fit amazing. It was fantastic. And this year, $1986 or whatever, it cost $95, which for a teen, that was just like, are you in when my dad found out about that, he flipped his lid. It was like, are you kidding me? $95, you buy. And then I got a great lesson on how I would be taking care of that shirt, like it was, like my life depended upon it. And I did. But here's the thing, actually the shirt took care of me. And the brand promise of Ralph Lauren at that time was, this was quality. And that shirt lasted, and I had purchased it a little bit large. And you're not going to believe this, Michael, but I was a husky kid. And it was purchased large enough that I could wear it for about 3 years. And it finally just didn't fit me anymore, but it was in perfect condition. And that was the brand promise that Ralph Lauren made to me as a youngster. And I continued to buy his products, knowing full well that promise would be fulfilled, until I started to see them in Costco. And I got a Ralph Lauren product out of Costco one day, and I suddenly realized, he broke his promise. He literally broke his promise to me. And I stopped assuming everything with a little polo character on it was of quality. It no longer meant that to me. So personal brand is the same thing. Again, it's not a logo, it's a promise. It's who you are. What do you stand for? What are you? What's the expectation? What can I count on? For example, there are people that I know, if I say, hey, do you want to meet at 10 o'clock? Their brand is, that actually means 10:15. That actually means I may get a text at 10 o'clock saying, on my way. And in fact, they've actually just left a place 5 miles away. So on their way means, look, I'm going to be 20 minutes late. That's a brand promise, such as somebody who shows up 5 minutes early or specifically on time. Somebody who's going to tip well is a brand. That's your brand. Are you tight-fisted? Do you appreciate good service? Or, so all of these things allow you to become, you already are the brand, but are you completely aware of what you're projecting to the world? Are you completely aware of what other people think your brand is? Is it different? Is it antithetical to what you think your brand is? Well, there's a couple ways you can go about ensuring that, but just being aware, first off, you've built a brand already where you are with what you've got. This is your brand. Now you can alter that brand using trust, loyalty, goodwill. These foundational principles can be applied at any time in your life. It's never too late to correct course. You can always alter and adjust your brand, but you have to remember the foundation on which you build it is the promise we remember about you. It's the promise of your brand, and it's completely unique to you, a little bit like your fingerprint, which, Michael, I know disturbs you as, leaving those crime scene fingerprints. It's bothersome. But
latex gloves, that's the answer. Latex glove.
Yeah, see, I would encourage you to burn off your fingerprints, but that's okay. Do the gloves in.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, there's a personal brand. We do know the people who will be habitually late, or who always, who always undersell themselves or oversell themselves, as far as people that we work with. And I've always wanted to have a brand of, I've striven. Is that a word? I've strived to have a brand that is, I'm good to my word. I'm always on time. I always try and over deliver on something that I promise on. I mean, but it's always a work in progress, right? It's never, you could always slip back.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Brands make mistakes. And I'm sure that Ralph Lauren figured that out at some point with his Costco endeavor, by the way. He's like, oh, we're going to do so much more volume this year. Oh, yeah. But you know what? We really sold out and we lost our core brand. The core principles of our brand really shifted. And I know that seems like a really superficial example, but it's about it really is probably one of the best examples I could make. Bud Light is another one. For example, how off-brand was that Dylan Mulvaney ad campaign? That guy
Right.
out there wearing a dress and promoting Bud Light, and man, did that blow up, because it was against not the beer, but against their brand promise. What do they stand for? Which I never even thought about Bud Light twice. I can't stand light beer. I don't understand why people drink it. It's like a why bother beer. But at the same time, they had apparently a pretty loyal contingent of drinkers, and they broke that promise, and they paid many multiples of price for that. But we can go through a quick exercise to build your own brand. It's just a 3-step process, Michael.
All right. Well, I'd love to hear the 3 steps.
Well, insert your credit card, please. I'm kidding.
Okay.
So see, that's on brand for me, right? I want to collect something.
$8.99 a minute. Just go ahead.
I needed the work. I was young. Okay, number 1, define honest. What do you want others to expect from you? What do you expect from yourself? But what do you want to project to others, and what should and what shall we expect from you? And is it about quality, reliability, or something else? You get to pick, but define your promise. What is your personal, unique brand promise? Second step, identify your personal core values. What are your principles? What are principles on which you'll stand no matter the cost to you personally? And by that, I mean reputationally, or what have you, or if you see a woman being hit or assaulted, do you step in? Is your brand, I'm going to step in even if I get stabbed, get gut shot? Are you that person? What is your core value? Are you going to stand up, for example, on the bond question? We were just talking about that. Will I lose business? Absolutely. But my brand value and my core principle is I will speak the truth, irrespective of how it affects me financially. I do my best to use my words impeccably, but at the same time, there will be a cost. I will stand up anyway. That's my core values, one of my core values. What are your core values? What will you stand up for no matter what? The strength of the wind against you, it may knock you down, you will get back up. What are those values? And then third, craft a message as though you are a brand, as though you are Procter & Gamble, as though you are Ralph Lauren, as though you are whomever. What is your message? Craft an actual message that in a sentence or a tagline would state who you are and what you're standing for. Who are you for? When we first opened Story Real Estate in 2007, we had a tagline, internal tagline in our office. We're not for everybody. Meaning we understand we're not for everybody. We want to find the people we're here to serve. There are people that are in alignment with us, and we're in alignment with them, and we have an audience. We have a group of people to serve. And so our message to ourselves internally was, we're not for everybody, and that's okay. We're going to stand on these principles. This is our brand promise: quality, reliability, honor, respect. We collect less in dollars than we provide in use value.
Right.
That's all part of our brand. And individually, we each wear our own brand. So define your promise, identify your core values, and then craft a message as though you were going to have it printed on a flyer.
Right. Or a business card. Here's who I am, all in a nutshell.
Yes.
And I agree with you. I mean, it's not always easy. Like I said, I've been doing radio for 20 years and working in the community with businesses and things like that. And you're right. You do sometimes, if you speak the truth, even if it's just the truth as you understand it, sometimes people are going to be upset. You're going to lose business. But you have to decide where that line in the sand is drawn on everything. And it's the same thing. Maybe you offend somebody at your work because of what you stand for, et cetera, et cetera. Chris Story, the man from Homer. Folks, we're out of time for today. Tomorrow is Wednesday. Mike Shower will be joining us and more. Chris, thank you so much for coming on board. Hold the line for just a second, okay? We'll be back tomorrow. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Thank you so much for coming on board with us today. We will see you tomorrow. All right, Chris, sorry, I was running. I didn't realize how late I was till I looked up. So just final thoughts, wrap up, anything else on this personal brand? I think people don't realize that whether they intend to or not, they're creating a personal brand. Like you said, we all have that friend that says, you say, be there at 10, and they're like, yeah, we'll be there at 10. And it'll be 10:15, 10:20, 10:30.
Right.
And they may not even be doing it intentionally, but they just, this is who they are. And you love them for it. But at the same time, that's not the person that I want to be.
a quick example of being on or off brand, whether you intend or not to. 17 years ago, when I started in radio, I got this bug of, I want to get involved in politics, because it started out just to promote investment in real estate. Just like, look, you can make $1 million in your own backyard. Tune in each week and I'll show you how. And then I started talking politically and started getting, maybe I should bifurcate and have 2 programs. One where I talk politics, one where I talk about real estate and personal development. And so that political show, I really enjoyed it, built a really loyal audience and following, because I was trying to my best, hold people accountable. But what I was doing was so off brand with me relative to mocking people, like very openly coming up with character names for the town city manager and, all these people. I do these skits and, all these different voices, and kind of just really mocking them personally for the decisions they'd made. And, it was fun. It was a lot of fun. But then at the same time, it actually was degrading my own person. I couldn't sleep at night. I started getting like, I don't like this, because that's not who I am. And it felt so bad that I just quit altogether and walked away from politics completely. For the most part, I would say 98% walked away, because it just didn't feel right. And then I realized later, I could do this in a way that's got integrity for who I am. And I don't have to, just because you and I disagree on something, I don't have to make you small to make my idea better.
Right.
My idea might just be better. And I'm also open to the idea I could be wrong, but let's talk about it. And so that to me is on brand, politically speaking, versus I want to go scorched earth. And when I was doing scorched earth, it just was so off brand. It literally was making me sick. And I was like, I got to walk away from that. And now I'm on a point where I understand my brand better, meaning who I am and what my promise to you, the listener, is.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. And at this, I try to do something similar in the show. Sometimes I end up doing some name calling or some character voices, but again, it's more, it is what it is. But I'm not afraid to talk to people face to face and confront them with that same caricature, or say, look, this is what you've been doing. Why? And so, and it's not mean spirited. It's a lot of times I'm here to entertain and to make people think. And sometimes you need laughter to do that. So, but you're right. I would not see that as being Chris Story's brand versus my own personal brand. We're different. I hate to tell you this, but we're different people. So
don't tell mother.
I know, really, she'll be upset, but this is a good thought. It's making me think here a little bit. I appreciate that. So Chris Story, I love Homer. Alaska.com. That's where you go find him. His latest book, his latest workbook to go along with the Backyard Millionaire is called The Millionaire Maker, and it's available at ilovehomeralaska.com, also on Amazon, and also on Audible. It just got read, so it's all good. So Chris,
awesome. I just re-listened to it recently, Michael. You did an amazing job, as always.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's always a labor of love when I'm doing stuff for you. I appreciate that. All right. Thank you so much, my friend. It's good to talk with you. We'll talk with you next week, okay?
All right. Sounds good.
All right, folks. We are out of time for today. Tomorrow is Wednesday. Another day. We're ready to, we'll be ready to jump into it with both feet and have something new come up. All right. So be kind, love one another, live well. We'll see you tomorrow. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio.
We've shed our terrestrial radio skin, and now we are slimy lizard internet people. It's the Michael Duke Show.